Welcome to the Jungle, Bengals fans. I'm Kyle Phelps, and my opinions are always 100% accurate, and you're all just wrong. It's about time that we start really ramping up for the coming football season, so I figured I'd kind of kick things off in this area with a record predictions video for the Bengals. Shout out to Jim NFL 7134 who kind of got the brain juices going on this one in a discussion that we had in the comments. I'll feature his actual comment at the end, but yeah, basically we're going to break down the Bengals' upcoming regular season schedule and predict their record and potential playoff seeding at the end of the episode. Now, I'm not going to predict the playoffs themselves right now because I'm not doing the whole NFL. I don't know what everybody's record and seeding is going to be. Although, if you want to see me make that video, just let me know and maybe that'll be the next one I put out. But before we get into that, I'd just like to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. It really helps my channel grow and it helps you know when all of my content comes out. Now, part of the reason I want to do this video in the first place is because I want to be able to go back at the end of this season and kind of just break down how right, or probably in a lot of cases wrong, I actually was about, breaking down some of these games. I do feel pretty confident that the Bengals are a playoff team, but obviously anything can happen. Joe Burrow goes out for the rest of the season. I like Trevor Siemian, but, I'm not terribly confident at that point. So let's go ahead and dive in and take this one game at a time. The Bengals kick off the season this year with a trip up to Cleveland in the 100th Battle of Ohio. And me and my co-host of the Battle of Ohio podcast, Thomas, are going to have to do something for that one, man. I'll just say we got a couple ideas in mind for that. But exactly how this game goes, I think, is going to depend a little bit on Joe Burrow's health. I'm a believer in the theory that Joe Burrow and the Bengals conspired to kind of fake his calf injury, or at least blow it out of proportion to justify keeping him from any contact during the preseason. And that's not so much a thing Joe Burrow would do by himself, but I could see the Bengals kind of together making that part of his contract negotiations. It's not exactly Joe's MO, but I'm just saying he was walking around the facility without any sort of brace and without any noticeable limp at all. So, I mean, how hurt is he really? That's all I'm saying. This idea that Jamar Chase wants Joe Burrow to sit until week 5 seems a little silly to me based on the evidence. I understand what he's saying, and I really do believe in Trevor Siemian's ability to hold down the fort temporarily, for a couple of weeks, and so maybe that's the route they do go. But either way, I think that this is a win for the Bengals. Deshaun Watson, I think, might be better this year. But I also think it's going to take him a little bit of time to warm up, and it's not necessarily going to be week 1 he's ready to go. The home opener in week 2 is against the Baltimore Ravens, and I think this game might be the one that I'm kind of the most back and forth on throughout pretty much the whole rest of the schedule. Despite my conspiracy theory, I think it's possible that Joe Burrow isn't 100% at this point in the season, kind of like last year with the appendix. Whether he plays or not, it's possible he might take a few weeks to warm up like he did last year. Although, I think he'll be fine. If he's not, then this, I think, is probably a win for a Ravens team that starts hot. And, that's typically the way they do things during Lamar's tenure. Plus, they're going to be really hungry to justify that contract. But, again, assuming Burrow's health, which I am, I'll call this one a win. Alright, so we got a Super Bowl rematch in week 3, y'all. Kind of. The Bengals lost that Super Bowl, but I think at this point they're clearly the better of the two teams after the fact. I do think Stafford's going to come back and have a bit of a bounce back year as long as he's fully healthy. But in general, the Rams as a whole are a shell of the recent Super Bowl champions. The Bengals' offensive line is better than it was back then, and the Rams' pass rush is worse. They still got Aaron Donald, but that's about it, so dub. Another team who is a shell of its former self is the Tennessee Titans, whom the Bengals go on the road to play in week 4. Now, I suppose it's always possible that they could come out of nowhere, but their biggest off-season moves will probably need some time to develop. DeAndre Hopkins was a big get for them, but just like we saw in Arizona, he might need somebody to throw the ball to him to make a significant impact, and we just don't know what the Titans have to offer right now in general, and especially at the quarterback position. So I'm expecting a 4th win in a row here for the Bengals. Week 5, the Bengals head southwest to play the Arizona Cardinals, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this one at all. I fully expect the Cardinals to be competing for the first overall pick this year, so until I see something different, I think this one should probably be one of the easier wins for the Bengals this year. Things potentially do get a little tougher in Week 6, though, as the Bengals fly back home to face the Seattle Seahawks. Geno Smith was one of the biggest surprises in the NFL last year, but I think he regresses a little more toward the mean this year. So even with Bobby Wagner back, I expect the Bengals to handle business here and get that win. Now after a bye week in Week 7, I think the Bengals' first big challenge comes in Week 8 against the San Francisco 49ers. Surprise, y'all! Sounds like Brock Purdy is going to be ready to start the 2023 season, so the 49ers' biggest question appears to be solved. And beyond that, I think they're one of the most complete rosters in the NFL right now. I wouldn't be shocked to see them representing the NFC in the Super Bowl this year. And with the Bengals' first 6 weeks being, let's say, less challenging than traveling to the West Coast to face a juggernaut, I do think they kind of get knocked off their track a little bit this week and come up with their first loss of the season. Week 9 might be the most highly anticipated matchup of the Bengals' home slate this year. I say this as a season ticket holder, and I can promise you that those tickets are definitely the highest in demand of the bunch right now. I do think that the Bills had a fine offseason, albeit not really a franchise-altering one or anything like that, but the Bengals also seem to have the Bills' number right now, and I don't see any reason why that changes here, so I think the Bengals are going to start the season 7-1 at this point. Week 10, the Bengals are going to host the Houston Texans, which, by the way, is going to be my son's first Bengals game. So all I'm saying is they better win. You know, any given Sunday and all that, I get it. Like, the Bengals always, every year, have 1 or 2 games that they just lose in mind-bogglingly stupid fashion. But the only realistic prediction, I think, here is that the Bengals get the win, unless the Texans suddenly get their shit together. Again, I'm trying to be realistic here. The Bengals get the Ravens again in Week 11, this time out in Baltimore. And I mentioned it earlier, the Ravens tend to be much worse in the second half, and the playoffs for that matter. So I fully expect that trend to continue as the Lamar Jackson era continues. So bring out those brooms. I'm personally really excited about Week 12, man. It feels like a new era in the Bengals-Steelers rivalry. The Steelers have beaten the Bengals once in the last 5 meetings, and that was literally only because our long snapper got hurt. Like, the Bengals won that game, and then they missed the extra point because, like, the backup long snapper couldn't handle it. And don't forget, that was the first game after Joe Burrow's appendix literally exploded, so I expect more of the same here. Bengals win. The Bengals fly south to Duval County to play the Jaguars in Week 13. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting a huge regression here for the Jaguars necessarily. All I'm saying is they're a bit out of nowhere last year, and they didn't exactly have a particularly impressive offseason, at least I don't think. So I think the Bengals should be the better team here and get the win. Week 14, the Bengals host the Indianapolis Colts, and I might be in the serious minority of people here who think that the Colts are going to be like surprise contenders this year. Like, I'm not saying they're going to be Super Bowl contenders or anything like that, but I think Anthony Richardson could lead a renaissance for the Colts. And what I'm saying here is I expect them to be scrappy, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Bengals kind of get trapped off guard and kind of like a trap game here in what might be a serious playoff push for the Indianapolis Colts. So I'm actually going to predict the Bengals lose this one. That said, in Week 15, they host a Minnesota Vikings team that really should, I think, show more of their true colors this upcoming season. I don't think anybody really bought into what their regular season record was selling last year, and I think they're decidedly worse going into this season. So I feel pretty confident in predicting the Bengals are going to get a win here. Week 16, the Bengals travel to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers, and I think you can see what I'm going for here. I already explained how I feel about this matchup, so bring out the brooms, y'all. Call me a hater, I don't care. Week 17 is probably the most highly anticipated overall matchup of the Bengals' regular season, and that's against the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm imagining this game will probably decide the AFC's #1 seed and could be a precursor of yet another AFC championship between these two teams. Like, if you're not a Bengals or Chiefs fan at this point, you've got to be kind of getting a little bored of these two in the conference title game. But as always, I think it's going to be a tough matchup for both teams. But I think the Bengals come out on top. And I'm not just saying that because I already have $100 on the game. They still own the Chiefs in the regular season. So it's not a foregone conclusion by any means because the Chiefs are a tough team. but I think the Bengals are going to be hungry to shake off the embarrassment of all that smack all of us talked before the AFC Championship game, only to come away just short. So I think they come away with a win in this one. Finally, the Bengals wrap up their regular season by hosting the Browns in Week 18. At this point, the Bengals already have the AFC's #1 seed wrapped up after beating the Kansas City Chiefs the previous week, so I think they'll probably rest their starters here. And I mean, who knows, guys? Like I said, I think Deshaun Watson has a bounce-back year this year, so the Browns might surprise and actually be fighting for a wild card seed in this one at the same time. So either way, I think that the rest of my predictions being correct means that I think they call this one an extra bye week, essentially, and they just take the loss because 14-3 still sounds really damn good. So there it is, y'all. Say what you want, but I broke down each individual game, and I looked at them, realistically as much as I could. And 14-3, I think, makes the most sense for a Bengals team that should be a juggernaut in 2023, and I'm not the only one saying that. Of course, weird, inconvenient injuries are going to pop up, and the final record's probably going to end up being something more like 13-4 or 12-5, because that's just kind of like what normally happens for any football team, which is still pretty damn good, by the way. So I think I'll split the difference and say that I think their final record is going to be 13-4, just to be a little more conservative, but I think 14-3 is very realistic as long as Joe Burrow stays healthy. So make of that what you will, but let me know your record predictions in the comments below, and I'll feature the best one in my next video, like this one from Jim NFL 7134, like I shouted out at the beginning of the video. Kind of gave me an idea for the video in the first place, right? He said 12-5 for the Bengals, and I actually initially agreed with him at first glance until I sat down and I analyzed the schedule and came up with 13-14 wins. Again, it's all predicated on a healthy Joe Burrow, but you kind of have to assume that if you're going to do predictions in the first place, because Joe Burrow's not healthy, I think they're lucky to make the playoffs. I'm actually kind of excited to see how this turns out and do a video at the end of the season kind of just breaking down how right or wrong I was on it in the first place. I imagine most of you are going to tune in to see the latter, but still. Until then, y'all can always catch more of what I do at Kyle Phelps92 on Twitter, Facebook.com/ThePhelps, Butt Fumble Sports, the Battle of Ohio podcast on the Spot Pod Network, and right here if you subscribe. Fair warning. Any comments suggesting that the Bengals win less than 9 games this year will immediately be sent to Azkaban prison. I'll leave y'all, as always, with a hootie!